There's something about turning 70 that makes you reflect on everything. I thought I'd lived a good life. I thought I'd raised good children. I thought a lot of things that turned out to be wrong. My name is Margaret Walsh, and I'm about to tell you about the day that changed everything. The day I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you most are the ones who hurt you deepest. But this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about finding your strength when you thought you had none left. It started on a Tuesday morning in early September. The kind of morning that feels like autumn is whispering its arrival, crisp air, golden light streaming through my kitchen window, and the smell of coffee brewing in the old percolator Edward bought me 30 years ago. I was tending to my garden, deadheading the last of the summer roses, when I heard the familiar creak of my front gate. "Morning, Mrs. Walsh," called out Jenny, my neighbor's daughter, jogging past with her golden retriever. She always had a smile for me. That girl made my heart warm every time. I waved back, my hands still dirty from the soil. There's something about gardening that keeps you grounded, literally and figuratively. Edward used to say I had magic in my fingers. Everything I touched seemed to bloom. "It's because you give everything love and attention," he'd say, kissing my forehead while I worked. Edward, my dear Edward. 3 years gone now, and I still set 2 coffee cups out every morning before remembering. Still turn to share a joke with empty air. Still sleep on my side of the bed, leaving his side untouched. We'd been married 42 years when the cancer took him. 42 years of Sunday morning pancakes, of heated debates about the thermostat, of quiet evenings reading side by side. He was my anchor, my compass, my best friend. A retired carpenter who built me a greenhouse with his own hands, who learned to cook when I went back to school to finish my teaching degree, who never once made me feel small for dreaming big. "Promise me something, Maggie," he'd whispered in those final days, his voice barely audible above the hum of hospital machines. "Promise me you'll never let anyone treat you like you don't matter. You're worth more than you know." I promised, of course, but sitting there in that sterile room, holding his hand as it grew cold, I had no idea what those words would come to mean. The weeks leading up to my 70th birthday were busy in the way that life gets when you're trying to keep your hands occupied and your mind from wandering. I'd been volunteering at the elementary school, helping kids with their reading. Those little faces, so eager to learn, so full of hope, they reminded me why I'd loved teaching for 35 years. "Mrs. Walsh, you're the best reader," little Sarah had told me just the week before, her gap-toothed grin stretching ear to ear. "You make all the voices different." If only my own family showed half that enthusiasm when I spoke. My 3 children, Robert, Patricia, and David, had been distant since Edward's funeral. I understood, of course. Grief affects everyone differently. Robert, my eldest, had thrown himself into his law practice. Patricia focused on her real estate business. David, my youngest, seemed to drift from job to job, always needing just a little help until he got back on his feet. They called dutifully. Every few weeks, visited 4 major holidays, sent flowers on Mother's Day. But there was something hollow about it all, like they were checking boxes on a list rather than connecting with their mother. "They're busy, Margaret," I'd tell myself while watering the petunias. "They have their own lives, their own families to worry about." The birthday party was Patricia's idea. She'd called 3 weeks before, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Mom, we simply must do something special for your 70th. It's such a milestone. We're thinking your house. You know how you love hosting there? We'll take care of everything." I should have been excited. Instead, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. When had my children started talking to me like I was one of their clients? When had "we'll take care of everything" started sounding more like a threat than a promise? But I pushed those thoughts away. These were my children. The babies I'd nursed through fevers, the toddlers I'd chased around this very house, the teenagers I'd waited up for on prom night. They loved me. Of course they did. The morning of the party, I woke before dawn. Not unusual. Sleep becomes elusive when you get to be my age. I made my coffee, fed Buttercup, my ancient tabby cat who'd been Edward's shadow, and sat on the back porch watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The house felt different with the promise of company. I'd spent the previous day cleaning every surface, arranging flowers from my garden, and making sure everything was perfect. The dining room table groaned under the weight of Edward's good china. The crystal glasses we'd received as wedding gifts, the silver candlesticks that had been his mother's. "Are you watching, Edward?" I whispered to the morning air. "Are you?" Proud of the home we built. The silence that answered felt heavier than usual. By 11 o'clock, cars were filling my driveway. Robert arrived first in his sleek black BMW, his wife Susan trailing behind in designer heels that clicked against my hardwood floors like a metronome. She air-kissed my cheek, leaving a smudge of lipstick that I'd have to scrub off later. "Margaret, darling, you look wonderful," she said, though her eyes were already scanning the room, probably appraising the antique furniture and wondering how much it was worth. Robert gave me a stiff hug, the kind you give distant relatives at funerals. "Happy birthday, Mom. Big 7-0, huh? Hard to believe." Patricia swept in next with her husband Jim and their twin teenage daughters, my granddaughters Emma and Sophie. The girls were glued to their phones, thumbs flying over screens, living in a world I couldn't begin to understand. "Girls, say hello to Grandma Margaret," Patricia instructed, her voice carrying that particular edge mothers use when they're trying to maintain appearances. Emma glanced up long enough to mumble, "Hi, Grandma," before returning to her digital universe. Sophie didn't even lift her head. "Don't take it personally," Patricia said, touching my arm with fake sympathy. "They're at that age, you know." I nodded, but something cold settled in my stomach. When had my grandchildren stopped running to me with excitement? When had I become just another adult to tolerate? David arrived last, as usual, with his girlfriend of the month, a woman half his age whose name I couldn't remember. He seemed nervous, fidgety, kept checking his phone and glancing at his siblings. "Sorry we're late, Mom," he said, kissing my forehead. Traffic was murder. It was noon on a Sunday. There was no traffic. We gathered in the living room, that beautiful space Edward and I had decorated together over the years. The Persian rug he'd surprised me with on our 10th anniversary. The bookshelf he'd built to hold my collection of first edition novels. The piano where I'd taught all 3 children to play, though none of them had kept it up. "Should we do presents?" Patricia asked, producing a stack of colorful envelopes and gift bags. I settled into Edward's old armchair, my chair now, I supposed, and accepted the first envelope. Inside was a generic birthday card from Robert and Susan, the kind you buy at the grocery store without reading. To a special someone on their birthday, it read, "Special someone, not even mother or mom. Someone." The message inside was equally impersonal. "Hope your day is filled with joy. Love, Robert and Susan." I smiled and thanked them, tucking the card aside. The gifts that followed were similar. A scented candle from Patricia that smelled like artificial vanilla. A gift certificate to a restaurant I'd never heard of from David. Flowers that were already beginning to wilt. "This is from Emma and Sophie," Patricia said. Handing me another envelope, I opened it carefully, hoping for something more personal from my granddaughters. Instead, I found a card clearly purchased by their mother, signed with their names in handwriting that looked suspiciously like Patricia's. The conversation during lunch was stilted, punctuated by long silences and the clink of silverware against china. They talked around me rather than to me. Robert complaining about his latest case, Patricia bragging about a house she'd sold, David making vague references to a big opportunity that would surely pan out this time. "Remember when we used to have real conversations at these dinners?" I wanted to ask. "Remember when you told me about your dreams, your fears, your hopes?" But I didn't. I just smiled and nodded and pretended everything was normal. After lunch, while I was clearing the dishes, I heard them in the living room. Their voices were low, but sound carries in old houses, and I'd learned to listen carefully over the years. Double quotes. Property taxes alone are killing her, Robert was saying. And the maintenance on this place? She's too stubborn to downsize, Patricia replied. You know how she gets about Edward's house? Maybe we should look into assisted living, Susan suggested. There are some very nice places. My hand stilled on the plate I was washing. Assisted living. I was 70, not 90. I lived independently, drove my own car, managed my own finances. I was lonely, not incompetent. She'd never go for it, David said. Besides, what would we do with all this stuff? 47 years of memories, and they called it stuff. I finished the dishes in silence, my hands trembling slightly. When I returned to the living room, they were deep in conversation about something else, their voices bright and artificial. More coffee, anyone? I asked, playing the gracious hostess as the afternoon wore on. People began to leave. Robert and Susan first, citing early morning meetings. Patricia and her family followed, the twins never having looked up from their phones. David lingered, as he always did when he needed something. Mom, I hate to ask, but I'm a little short this month. The job market's been tough. And how much do you need? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Was always $500. It's just enough to keep him afloat until the next crisis. He looked relieved. You're the best, Mom. I'll pay you back as soon as I know. I said, though. We both knew he wouldn't. I wrote him a check anyway, because that's what mothers do. We enable. We hope. We pretend things will change. After everyone left, I sat in the quiet of my living room, surrounded by the detritus of celebration. Crumpled napkins, empty glasses, the lingering scent of forced cheerfulness. Buttercup jumped onto my lap, purring, and I stroked her soft fur while looking at the pile of birthday cards on the coffee table. That's when I saw it. An envelope that didn't belong with the others. It was cream-colored, expensive-looking, with my name written in Patricia's careful script. But there was something about it that seemed ... different. I picked it up, noting how it felt heavier than the others. Inside was a card that made my blood run cold. The front showed a cartoon vulture wearing a party hat, with the words, "Another. You're older," in cheerful script. Already, I felt uneasy. This wasn't the kind of card you give your 70-year-old mother, but when I opened it, my world shattered. Written in Patricia's handwriting were the words, "To Mom, too stubborn to die, too cheap to live well. Lucky us, we get to keep paying her bills." Below that, in different handwriting, Robert's, I realized, was a list. Future inheritance split. House, $850,000, Robert. Investments, $400,000, Patricia. Jewelry, antiques, $150,000, David. Leftover cash. Split 3 ways at the bottom. In David's scrawl, hopefully she doesn't blow it all on cats and birdseed before she kicks the bucket. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the card. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cruel joke that wasn't meant for me to see. But as I stared at the handwriting I'd seen on countless homework assignments, birthday cards, Christmas lists, I knew it was real. My children had written this. My children had passed it between them, laughing at my expense. Too stubborn to die. It's too cheap to live well. The words echoed in my mind like a slap. Is that really what they thought of me? The woman who'd worked 2 jobs to pay for their college educations, who'd sacrificed vacations and new clothes and countless luxuries to give them everything they needed. I thought about all the times I'd helped them over the years. It's the down payment I'd given Robert for his first house. The money I'd lent Patricia to start her business. It's the countless loans to David that we both knew would never be repaid. And this was how they saw me. Not as their mother, but as an inconvenience. A burden. A bank account with a pulse. I sat there for a long time, holding that card, feeling something inside me break. Not just my heart that had been breaking slowly for years. Something deeper. Something fundamental. The respect I'd had for the children I'd raised, the love I'd clung to despite their indifference, the hope that things would get better, that they'd remember how to be my children again. It was all gone. I stood up slowly, legs unsteady, and walked to the bathroom. I locked the door behind me and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked older than 70. She looked tired, defeated, used up. That's when I broke down. Not the gentle crying I'd done after Edward's funeral, but deep wrenching. Sobs that came from somewhere so deep I didn't know it existed. I cried for the mother I'd been, the one who'd believed her children loved her. I cried for the grandmother I'd hoped to be, the one who'd make cookies and tell stories and be cherished. Most of all, I cried for Edward. Edward, who'd seen this coming somehow, who'd tried to warn me with his dying words. I don't know how long. I sat on that bathroom floor, but when I finally stood up, something had changed. The grief was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something harder. Anger. That night, after I'd cleaned up the mess from the party, sat at my kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and stared at that horrible card. In the lamplight, the cruel words seemed even more vicious. I thought about calling them, confronting them, demanding an explanation. But what would I say? How could you write such terrible things about me? They'd deny it, make excuses, turn it around somehow. They'd make me feel guilty for snooping or misunderstanding. No, I was done being made to feel guilty for other people's cruelty. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the old metal box Edward had left me. I'd been avoiding it for 3 years, unable to face whatever memories it contained. But tonight, I needed to feel close to him. I needed to remember what it felt like to be loved. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were letters in Edward's careful handwriting, photographs from our early years together, and a thick manila envelope sealed with wax. The envelope had my name on it in Edward's script, along with a note for Maggie to be opened. Only if you need to remember your worth. My heart was pounding as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before Edward died and what looked like legal documents. My dearest Maggie, the letter began. If you're reading this, then something has happened that I hoped never would. Something that made you doubt yourself, doubt your worth, doubt the love you deserve. I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, Edward knew me better than anyone. I've been watching our children lately, and I'm worried. They love you. I know they do, but they've forgotten how to show it. They see you as a safety net, not as a person. They take your generosity for granted, your love for weakness. How had he known? How had he seen what I'd been blind to? I've set up a trust, Maggie. A special kind of trust with conditions. If any of our children or grandchildren ever treat you with disrespect, cruelty, or greed, they forfeit their inheritance. Every penny of it. I gasped, nearly dropping the letter. Edward had done what? I know this sounds harsh, but I've seen what happens to widows who are seen as walking wallets rather than human beings. I won't let that happen to you. The trust is ironclad, administered by my old friend Henry Carver at Carver & Associates. He has copies of everything, including the recordings I made of my conversations with each of the children about money and inheritance. Recordings. Edward had recorded conversations with our children. There's more, Maggie. I've also set up a separate account, one they know nothing about. It's $2 million in your name only. It's yours to do with as you please. Live your life, travel, donate to charity, spoil the grandchildren who actually love you. Whatever makes you happy. $2 million. I'd had no idea. The power is in your hands now, my love. You can choose to enforce the trust conditions or not. You can choose to forgive or to protect yourself. But please, please remember what I told you. Never let anyone treat you like you don't matter. You are worth more than you know. The letter was signed with his full name, witnessed and notarized. At the bottom, in his own handwriting, P.S. Check the safety deposit box. The key is in my jewelry box. You'll find everything you need. There, I set the letter down with shaking hands. Edward had known. Somehow he'd known that this day would come, and he'd prepared for it. The next morning, I called Henry Carver. Mrs. Walsh. His voice was warm, familiar. I've been expecting your call for 3 years. How are you holding up? I'm not sure, I said, honestly. I found Edward's letter. There was a pause. Ah, then you know about the trust. I know some of it, but I need to understand everything. Can we meet? Of course. How about this afternoon? I'll bring all the documentation. Henry's office was exactly as I remembered from the times Edward and I had updated our wills together. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, the smell of old books and respectability. Henry himself was a small man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. That had always put me at ease. Edward was very thorough, he said, spreading documents across his desk. The trust is structured so that you have complete control. You can activate the conditions or not, as you see fit. But once activated, it's irreversible. What exactly are the conditions? I asked. Any heir who demonstrates disrespect, cruelty, or exploitation toward you forfeits their inheritance entirely. Their share goes to a charity of your choosing. The determination of whether the conditions have been met rests solely with you. And the recordings Edward mentioned, Henry's expression grew sad. Edward was worried about your children's attitudes toward money. He recorded several conversations with them about inheritance, about your care, about their expectations. The recordings are ... illuminating. I need to hear them. Henry nodded and pulled out an old cassette player. Are you sure? Once you hear these, you can't unhear them. I thought about that cruel birthday card, about the years of feeling like an inconvenience in my own children's lives. I'm sure. The first recording was Robert's voice, clear and confident as always. But the words, look, Dad, I love Mom, but she's going to need care eventually. Expensive care. Would be irresponsible not to plan for that. The house alone is worth almost $1 million. We could sell it, invest the money, use the returns for her care. Robert Edwards' voice, weaker but still firm. Your mother is 70 years old and in perfect health. She doesn't need care. She needs respect. Of course. But we have to be practical. She's getting older, more forgetful. Someone needs to manage her finances, make sure she doesn't get taken advantage of. The hypocrisy was staggering. Robert was worried about me being taken advantage of while simultaneously planning to take advantage of me himself. The second recording was Patricia. I'm just saying, Dad, that house is way too big for her. She rattles around in there like a ghost. It would be much better for her to move somewhere smaller, more manageable. And the money from the house could be invested properly, professionally managed. By whom? Edward asked. Well, Jim and I have been doing very well with our investments. We could help her make better choices with her money. Better choices. As if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with my own finances. The third recording was the worst. David's voice slurred slightly. He'd been drinking. Come on, Dad. You know I'm not good with money. But Bobby and Patty, they're smart about this stuff. When you and Mom are gone, they'll make sure everything's handled right. I just need to know I'll be taken care of. You know? I've never been the successful one like them. David Edwards' voice was sharp. We're not gone. We're sitting right here. I know. I just meant ... Eventually, we all die, right? And when that happens, I just want to know the family will look out for me. Family as if I weren't part of the family. As if I were just an obstacle standing between them and their inheritance. I sat in Henry's office, listening to my children, plan my life around my death, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. These recordings were 3 years old, before Edward died, before I'd spent 3 years bending over backwards to maintain relationships with people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account. There's more, Henry said gently. Edward also set up surveillance. He had cameras installed in your home, very discreet ones. If you wanted to document any disrespectful behavior, cameras. I was shocked. Where? Living room, kitchen, front hallway. They're motion activated, completely legal since it's your home. The footage is stored digitally and sent to a secure server. Everything from the past 3 years is there. 3 years of footage. It's 3 years of my children treating me like a burden in my own home. Henry, I said slowly, I want to see everything. Every recording, every video, every document Edward left. And then I want to make some decisions. I spent the next week reviewing everything. The recordings were bad enough, but the video footage was devastating. Hours of my children going through my things when they thought I wasn't looking. Patricia measuring furniture just in case. Robert photographing my jewelry and antiques. David rifling through my desk drawers. There was footage of them talking about me and my own. Kitchen. She's completely out of touch with reality, Patricia was saying. Did you see how much she spent on groceries last week? It's buying food for an army? Someone needs to take control of her finances, Robert agreed. This can't continue. She gave David another $500. Patricia continued. At this rate, there won't be anything left for us. For us. As if my money belonged to them already. But the worst footage was from my last birthday party. After I'd gone to the kitchen to start the dishes, I watched my children pass around that horrible card, laughing at my expense. Did you see her face? When she opened David's gift, Patricia was giggling. She had no idea what to do with the restaurant gift card. That's because she never goes anywhere, Robert said. She just sits in this house like a hermit. Well, not for much longer, Susan. Had added, eventually she'll need to move somewhere with more supervision. Supervision. Like I was a criminal instead of their mother. I watched David add his cruel comment to the card. Watched them all laugh at his joke about me dying. I watched them calculate my worth like I was livestock at auction that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of Edward's favorite tea and made my decision. It took 2 weeks to set my plan in motion. Henry helped me with the legal aspects, drawing up new documents and ensuring everything was ironclad. I opened the safety deposit box Edward had mentioned and found even more documentation. Detailed records of every loan I'd given the children. Every emergency I'd helped them through. Every time I'd put their needs before my own. I also found something else. A small digital recorder. The kind journalists use. Edward had left it for me with a note, for when you need them to hear their own words. I called Patricia first. I've been thinking about what you said about the house being too big for me. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to make some changes. The eagerness in her voice was unmistakable. Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you're being sensible about this. Jim and I have been looking at some lovely retirement communities. Actually, I was thinking of something different. I'd like to have a family, meeting all of us together. I want to discuss my will, my estate planning, all of it. I think it's time to be transparent about these things. The silence on the other end was deafening. Your will, Mom, is everything okay? Are you ... Are you sick? I'm fine, Patricia. I just think it's time to be honest about expectations. Can you arrange something this Sunday afternoon? I made similar calls to Robert and David. All of them agreed immediately. It's probably smelling opportunity in the air. Sunday afternoon arrived, gray and drizzly. Fitting weather for what I had planned. I spent the morning preparing, setting up my digital recorder in the living room, positioning it where it would catch every word. I'd learned a few things from Edward about documentation. They arrived together this time, which was unusual. Clearly, they'd been talking among themselves, planning their approach. Mom, you look wonderful, Patricia said. Though her eyes were scanning the room again, probably noting which antiques she'd claim first. Thank you, dear. Please, everyone sit down. I have some things to share with you. Henry arrived exactly at 3 o'clock, as we'd arranged. I introduced him as Edward's lawyer, which was true, though I didn't mention he was now mine as well. I've asked Henry to help me with some estate planning, I said, settling into Edward's chair. I want to be transparent about my will, my assets, and my expectations for the future. Robert leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. Mom, this is very responsible of you. All been worried about your future care, your financial security, have you? I asked mildly, how thoughtful. Henry opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Mrs. Walsh has asked me to review her current financial situation with all of you. She wants to ensure everyone understands her wishes. Her wishes? David looked confused. Mom, what kind of wishes? I smiled at him, remembering the little boy who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories. Well, David, I suppose I should. Start with the things I've learned recently, about how you all really feel about me. The room went very quiet. For instance, I learned that you think I'm too stubborn to die and too cheap to live well. I learned that you see me as a financial burden, someone who needs supervision and management. I learned that you've been measuring my furniture and appraising my jewelry and planning my funeral while I'm still very much alive. Patricia's face went white. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? I reached into my purse and pulled out the birthday card. This is what I'm talking about. Held it up so they could all see it. The silence in the room was deafening. I found this card after my birthday party. It's a card you passed around, laughing at my expense. It's a card where you calculated my worth, like I was property to be divided. Robert cleared his throat. Mom, that WASN single quotes T ... we weren't. It was just a joke. A joke. My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking. Joking about my death is funny to you. Planning my inheritance before I'm gone is amusing. We didn't mean anything by it, Patricia said quickly. We were just being silly. Were you being silly when you told Robert that someone needs to take control of my finances? Were you being silly when you told David that I'm completely out of touch with reality? Were you being silly when you discussed moving me to a facility? With more supervision, their faces told me everything I needed to know. They were caught, and they knew it. David said, his voice small. How do you know about those conversations? 'Cause I've been listening, I said simply. For 3 years, I've been listening to you talk about me like I'm not even human. Like I'm just an obstacle standing between you and your inheritance. Henry spoke for the first time. Mrs. Walsh, would you like me to play the recordings? The recordings? I watched my children's faces as they realized the extent of their exposure. Robert looked sick. Patricia was crying. David looked like he wanted to run. That won't be necessary, I said. I think we all know what they contain. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years. I want you all to know that your father saw this coming. He knew that after he died, you'd start seeing me as a burden. Instead of a person, he knew you'd start planning my life around your convenience instead of my happiness. Dad knew. Robert's voice was barely a whisper. He knew, and he prepared for it. I nodded to Henry, who pulled out the trust documents. Your father set up a conditional trust, Henry explained. Any heir who demonstrates disrespect, cruelty, or exploitation toward your mother forfeits their inheritance entirely. The room erupted in shocked voices, but I held up my hand for silence. I didn't want to use it, I said. For 3 years, I hoped things would change. I hoped you'd remember how to be my children instead of my creditors. But that card, that card showed me who you really are. Please, Patricia was sobbing now. We're sorry. We didn't mean it. We love you. Do you? I asked. Love isn't taking. Love isn't measuring and calculating and planning. Love isn't seeing your mother as a problem to be solved. I looked at each of them, these adults who had once been my babies, my pride and joy. You want to know about my will? Here's what you need to know. I'm leaving everything to charity. How's the investments? The jewelry you've been appraising, all of it goes to educational foundations in your father's name. Mom, no. David was panicking now. You can't do that. We're family. Are we? I asked. 'Cause family doesn't laugh at each other's expense. Family doesn't plan around each other's deaths. Family doesn't see each other as burdens to be managed. Robert stood up, his face red with anger. This is ridiculous. You're being manipulated by that lawyer? Dad's dead. Mom, he doesn't get to control us from the grave. No, I said quietly, but I do get to control my own life. And I choose to live it with dignity, surrounded by people who see me as more than a bank account. I turned to Henry. Please, explain the trust activation to them. Henry's voice was professional, detached. The trust has been activated as of today. Robert, Patricia, and David Walsh are hereby removed as beneficiaries of Edward Walsh's estate. All assets will be donated to educational charities as specified in the trust documents. This is insane, Patricia said, her tears turning to anger. You can't do this over a stupid card. It's not about the card, I said. It's about 3 years of being treated like I don't matter. It's about watching you plan my life, like I'm not living it. It's about choosing to value myself the way your father valued me. David was crying now, ugly sobs that reminded me of his tantrums as a child. Mom, please, I need that money. I can't make it without that money. You've been making it without that money for 50 years, I said. You'll figure it out. I looked around the room one more time. I want you all to leave now. When you're ready to have a relationship with me that isn't about money, when you're ready to see me as your mother instead of your inheritance, you can call me. But until then, I think we need some space. They left in a flurry of tears and anger and threats. Robert promised to contest the will. Patricia accused me of being cruel and ungrateful. David just kept crying. After they were gone, Henry and I sat in the sudden quiet of my living room. That was very brave, he said. It was necessary, I replied. Edward was right. I was letting them treat me like I didn't matter. What will you do now? I thought about that question for a long time. I think I'll live, I said finally. Really live. For the first time in 3 years. The next few months were difficult. My children tried various tactics to change my mind. Tears, anger, guilt, and eventually silence. The silence was the hardest part. For all their faults, they were still my children, and I missed them. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. I used some of the money Edward had left me to travel. I went to Ireland, where his family had come from, and stood in the tiny church where his great-grandparents had married. I visited Italy and ate gelato in the same piazza, where Edward and I had honeymooned 43 years earlier. I took a cruise to Alaska and watched whales breach in waters so blue they looked like Edward's eyes. But the most important thing I did was reconnect with the parts of my family that actually mattered. My granddaughter, Emma, Patricia's daughter, called me about 6 months after the confrontation. She was crying. Grandma Margaret, I'm so sorry. I heard what happened, and I'm so sorry we were so awful to you. You weren't awful, sweetheart, I said, though my heart was breaking for her. You were just being teenagers. No, we were being brats. And Mom said such terrible things about you after you cut them off. But I remember how you used to read to us, how you taught me to bake your chocolate chip cookies, how you never missed a single school play even when we forgot to tell you about them until the last minute. I was crying now too. I remember all of that too. Can I see you? I'm 18 now, so Mom can't stop me. Can I please come see you? That afternoon, Emma sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught her to crack eggs and measure flour, and told me everything. How her parents had been fighting constantly about money since the will reading. How they'd been pressuring her and Sophie to talk sense into Grandma. How they'd forbidden the girls from contacting me. Sophie's scared. Emma said, she thinks you hate us now. I could never hate you girls, I said. You're my granddaughters. I love you no matter what. But we were so mean to you at your birthday party. We didn't even look up from our phones. I reached across the table and took her hands that looked so much like Patricia's at that age. Emma, you are being teenagers. That's different from being cruel. There's a difference between not knowing how to connect and actively choosing to hurt someone. We spent the afternoon baking cookies and talking. Really talking. Emma told me about her plans for college, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, her fears about leaving home. I told her about my own dreams at her age, about how I'd wanted to be a writer before I became a teacher. You could still write, she said. You tell the most amazing stories. Maybe I will, I said, and realized I meant it. Sophie came to see me a week later, nervous and apologetic. The reunion was just as sweet. These girls, my granddaughters, had been caught in the middle of their parents' greed, but they weren't lost to it. They were still the children I'd loved, just older and wiser. I have something for you, I told them both during one of our visits. I handed them each an envelope. Inside were letters I'd written to them, along with information about education funds I'd set up in their names. Not inheritance, they'd earn that through their own choices and character, but help with college, with starting their lives, with pursuing their dreams. These are yours regardless of what happens with your parents, I said. Your grandfather, and I always planned to help you with your education. That hasn't changed. Emma was crying again. Grandma, you don't have to do this. We don't deserve it after how we treated you. Love isn't about deserving, I said. It's about choosing to. Give it anyway. But there are conditions. They looked nervous. You have to promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like you don't matter. You have to promise me you'll stand up for yourselves and for others. You have to promise me you'll remember that people are more important than things. Promise Dot about a year after the confrontation, I did something I'd been thinking about for months. I bought a small cottage by the lake about an hour from my old house. It was perfect. 2 bedrooms, a screened porch, a dock where I could sit and watch the sunrise. Most importantly, it was mine. Not a house filled with memories of happier times, but a fresh start. I kept a few special things from the old house Edwards books, my grandmother's china, the piano, where I'd taught my children to play. The rest I donated or sold. Patricia had been right about one thing. The house was too big for me. But not because I was helpless, it's because I was choosing to live differently. The cottage became a haven. Emma and Sophie visited regularly, bringing friends sometimes, filling the space with laughter and young voices. I started writing not the novel I'd dreamed of in my youth, but a different kind of story. I wrote about aging with dignity, about recognizing your worth, about the difference between being alone and being lonely. I also started volunteering at a local literacy center, teaching adults to read. There's something powerful about helping someone decode their first sentence, about watching their face light up when the words finally make sense. It reminded me why I'd loved teaching in the first place. 2 years after the confrontation, Robert called me. Not Patricia or David. They were still too proud, too angry. But Robert, Mom, he said, his voice uncertain. I was wondering if we could talk. We're talking now, I said. Mean in person? I have some things I need to say to you. We met at a coffee shop halfway between his house and my cottage. He looked older, tired. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. I've been thinking about what you said, he began. About seeing you as a person instead of a problem. About treating you like you matter. I waited, I think. I think I forgot how to be your son instead of your lawyer. I started managing you. Instead of loving you, why? Asked. He was quiet for a long time because it was easier. Because managing someone means you don't have to be vulnerable with them. Because I was scared of losing you. And somehow I thought if I could control everything, I could keep you safe. But you couldn't keep me safe from you, I said gently. He started crying then. This successful, composed man broke down in a coffee shop and cried like the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry we made you feel like you didn't matter. You matter so much. You've always mattered more than anything. I reached across the table and took his hand. I know you're sorry, and I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. I know, he said. I don't expect you to change your mind about the will. That's not why I'm here. Then why are you here? 'Cause I miss my mom. 'Cause I want to learn how to be your son again. 'Cause I want to earn back your trust, even if it takes the rest of my life. We talked for 3 hours. Really talked. He told me about his work, his fears, his regrets. I told him about my new life, my writing, my cottage by the lake. When we said goodbye, he hugged me. Not the stiff, obligatory hug of the past few years, but a real hug. A son hugging his mother. "Can I call you?" he asked. "I'd like that," I said. He did call. Once a week at first, then more often. He came to visit the cottage, met some of my new friends, saw the life I'd built for myself. Slowly, carefully, we began to rebuild our relationship. Patricia took longer. She was angrier, more resentful. She felt I'd betrayed her by choosing Emma and Sophie over her. It took her 3 years to understand that I hadn't chosen anyone over anyone else. I'd simply chosen to have relationships based on love instead of obligation. When she finally came to see me, she was different. Smaller somehow. The real estate market had been tough, and she'd been struggling. Jim had left her, taking half their assets and their carefully planned financial future. "I guess I know how it feels now," she said quietly. "To be seen as a bank account instead of a person." We were sitting on my porch watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of pink and gold. Just like the sunrise on my 70th birthday when everything had changed. "I'm sorry that happened to you," I said. "No one deserves to be treated that way." "I treated you that way," she said. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." We cried together. Then, for the years we'd lost, for the pain we'd caused each other, for the relationship we'd almost destroyed. "Can we start over?" she asked. "We can try," I said. David was the last to come around, and honestly, I'm not sure he ever really understood what he'd done wrong. He apologized, but it felt hollow, like he was going through the motions. He was still looking for handouts, still expecting me to solve his problems. I've learned to accept that. I told my therapist yes. I started seeing a therapist at 73. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made. David is who he is. I can love him without enabling him. I can have a relationship with him without being his bank. That's a very mature perspective, she said. It only took me 7 decades to figure it out. I laughed now. 5 years after that horrible birthday party, I'm sitting on my porch with my morning coffee, watching the mist rise off the lake. Buttercup is gone. She passed peacefully in her sleep 2 years ago, but I have a new companion now, a rescue dog named Hope, who follows me everywhere and reminds me daily that love doesn't have to be complicated. My relationship with my children is different now, not perfect, but honest. Robert and I have lunch once a month, and he's learned to ask about my life instead of trying to manage it. Patricia and I are still rebuilding, but we're getting there. David and I exchange Christmas cards and birthday calls. Okay, and that's enough. But my relationship with Emma and Sophie, that's pure joy. They're both in college now, pursuing their dreams, becoming the strong, independent women I always hoped they'd be. They still come to the cottage on weekends, bringing their friends, their boyfriends, their problems, and their triumphs. "Tell us about Grandpa Edward," Sophie said last weekend. "Tell us about when you two were young." So I told them about the boy who built me a greenhouse with his own hands, who learned to cook when I went back to school, who saw my worth when I couldn't see it myself. I told them about the man who loved me enough to protect me even after he was gone. "He sounds wonderful," Emma said. He was, I agreed. But the most wonderful thing about him was that he taught me to see my own worth. He taught me that I deserved better than I was accepting. "Is that why you stood up to our parents?" Sophie asked. "That's exactly why," I said. Sometimes you have to choose yourself. Sometimes you have to insist on being treated with dignity and respect. Sometimes you have to be willing to lose relationships that aren't healthy in order to find ones that are." "But it must have been scary," Emma said. "Cutting them off like that is terrifying," I admitted. But you know what was scarier? The thought of spending whatever years I had left being seen as a burden instead of a person. The thought of dying without ever standing up for myself? Do you regret it? Svi asked. I looked around at my cottage, at my life, at these two beautiful young women who saw me as their grandmother instead of their inheritance. I thought about my writing, my volunteer work, my friends at the literacy center. I thought about Robert learning to be my son again, about Patricia slowly rebuilding our relationship. I regret that it took so long, I said. I regret that I accepted being treated poorly for as long as I did. But I don't regret standing up for myself. I don't regret choosing dignity over convenience. You're brave, Grandma, Emma said. No, sweetheart, I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being small. I'm tired of apologizing for taking up space in the world. That's what I want you to understand. If you take anything from my story, you don't have to be brave to stand up for yourself. You just have to be tired of accepting less than you deserve. The money Edward left me, I've been using it to live. Really live. I've traveled, learned new things, met new people. I've donated to causes I care about, helped my granddaughters with their education, supported local charities. I've used it to build a life that brings me joy instead of storing it away for people who saw me as an obligation. And the inheritance. My children lost. It's going to good causes, just like I promised. Scholarships for underprivileged children, funding for literacy programs, support for elderly people who need advocates. Edward would be proud. But here's what I've learned. The real inheritance isn't money. It's knowing your worth. It's refusing to accept cruelty disguised as love. It's choosing relationships that build you up instead of tear you down. My children thought they were entitled to my money because they were family. But entitlement isn't love. Taking isn't caring. Seeing someone as a means to an end isn't relationship. It's exploitation. I'm 75 now, and I've never been happier. I wake up each morning in my cottage by the lake, and I know that. Everyone in my life chose to be here. They're not here because they have to be, or because they're waiting for me to die, or because they need something from me. They're here because they love me and I love them back freely, without conditions, without keeping score. That's the real victory. Not the money I kept from my children, not the revenge I took for their cruelty. The real victory is that I learned to love myself enough to demand better. Sometimes people ask me if I'm lonely. The answer is no. I'm alone sometimes, but I'm not lonely. There's a difference between being by yourself and being abandoned by the people who should love you. I have my cottage, my writing, my volunteer work, my granddaughters, my slowly healing relationships with Robert and Patricia. I have hope, my faithful dog who thinks I'm the most important person in the world. I have friends who see me as Margaret, not as somebody's mother or grandmother or widow. I have a life that's mine. Sometimes, when I'm sitting on my porch in the evening, I talk to Edward. I tell him about my day, about the girl's latest adventures, about the book I'm writing. I tell him about the woman I've become since he's been gone. I kept my promise. I whispered to the evening air. I didn't let them treat me like I don't matter. And in the gentle breeze that rustles through the trees, in the way the last light of day reflects off the water, I swear I can hear him whisper back, "I'm proud of you, Maggie. You're worth more than you know." Maybe I didn't lose my family that day 5 years ago. Maybe I finally saw who they really were. And maybe, just maybe, I chose something better. I chose peace. I chose dignity. I chose myself, and that, my friends, made all the difference. If you're listening to this story and you see yourself in my situation, you're being treated like a burden instead of a blessing. If you're being seen as a bank account instead of a person, please know this. You deserve better. You deserve to be loved, not managed. You deserve to be respected, not tolerated. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to demand dignity. It's never too late to build a life that brings you joy. Trust me, I should know.